everyone. Welcome to another episode of Walchet Talks. Now, we all know that just adopting shiny new software tools does not usher in innovation. If one is looking to inculcate the spirit of innovation within an organization, you're talking about changing the mindset of people, teaching them to look at methods of continuous improvement and process mapping. A large part of the process of adopting new technology is also change management. That involves change management with different stakeholders, users, leaders, IT staff, and business and operational teams. And it is not easy, even though it is sometimes overlooked. It is the most critical process of innovation. Today, we have Andrew Beasley, Regional Director for Clifford Chance's Innovation and Best Delivery Hub in APAC, to help us understand the strategies for innovation in a law firm. How are you doing today, Andrew?
Hello there, and I'll say good morning. It's good morning when we're recording this. I'm well, thank you. It's great to be here and very much looking forward to talking about pretty much what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Wonderful. Thank you for being with us. As we all know, lawyers and law firms are busy people and they don't always want to make the time for anything non-billable. So getting a law firm to foster an environment of continuous improvement and innovation is no easy feat. And this is exactly what Andrew and his team have implemented at Clifford Chance in APAC. Andrew is a Lean Six Sigma master belt, and he leads a multidisciplinary team focused on helping the lawyers think differently about how legal services can be delivered. He also ran his own consulting business, Andrew Beasley Consulting, which focused on project management and business analysis. We're delighted to have you with us today, Andrew.
Delighted to be here.
So I thought we would start with a basic question in the context of legal service delivery. What exactly does the term innovation refer to? And I have talked about this before. Innovation is just not software. Sometimes it's just a better process. So what would you say would fall within the definition of innovation at a firm?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So it's a very relevant question, and I would agree. I think a lot of people assume that when we talk about innovation, a law firm, they're simply talking about rolling out a new digital solution or a new piece of software. I think that's sort of the logical leap that people jump to. I think about it slightly differently, and in a slightly broader concept, I think about innovation in a change concept. And that kind of breaks down into sort of two areas or two broad areas. The first being obviously change management, which is very much sort of changing the way that we work. And then innovation as a sort of a separate sort of subtopic of change, which is sort of more about changing what legal services are actually doing. And there's just a slight differentiation there. So if I sort of unpack that a little bit. So when we're talking about change management or changing the way that law is done, we kind of look at that in terms of what can we do today, and identifying things that are available to us now that we can apply to the practice of law. And that's sort of identifying and rolling out sort of tech solutions. So tech is still part of that enhance the way the lawyers do it. It could also be deploying sort of legal project managers to help run sort of complex transactions. It could be the continuous improvement sort of approach where we look at how work is done and we try and actually change that process through sort of understanding processes, which I can talk a little bit more later. But then also the change management goes around that. But then also looking at what resourcing is available to actually do the work. So making sure we've got the right people doing the right types of work. And so that's what it kind of sort of falls into that sort of, how do we change things now, and that sort of change management bucket.
Yeah.
And then when we think about innovation, so this is where sort of any kind of need, whether that be the client or the firm that we're working with, intersects with what I call novelty. And so what do I mean by that? So that I mean where we sort of spot an opportunity or we have a problem that we want to try and solve, and we do that in a way that hasn't been done before. So we take an innovative approach. So whether that be looking at research and development, sort of feeding in from organisations outside of us, working with partners, whether that be legal tech providers or other providers, consultants, and trying to get sort of different opinions, different ideas to understand what can we do differently. And to be fair, even tapping into our lawyers and other business professionals in the firm to see what new ideas they can come up with. But essentially, it's anything that's new. It's not something we've tried before as well too. So that kind of breaks down into those two areas. Having said that, though, if you drew a Venn diagram of those two things, they would overlap considerably, because what is sort of today's innovation is tomorrow's change management challenge. So we can come up with lots of new ideas and lots of fantastic ways of doing things are new. But then we have to sort of move that into that change management mode and make sure they are implemented efficiently, implemented properly. Because if they don't get used, then essentially we've wasted that opportunity.
Yeah. And I really like the common thread through everything that you mentioned, which is bringing in the experts, whether it's legal project managers or consultants from outside, but basically somebody who knows what they're doing to sort of shake things up, change things around, because you want to look at how we can do things differently, because you know that there's a more efficient way of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point, is that lawyers essentially charge for their time. They're busy people. And so essentially any time that they spend away from servicing the client's needs is essentially a revenue opportunity that we're not taking in. So bringing specialists in who have time to think about that, have the time to invest in looking at those solutions is very, very important. I think, just from a point of view of just also breaking the lawyers out of the way they think as well too, bringing someone in who doesn't think like a lawyer is also quite important.
Yeah. You also talked about the concepts of continuous improvement, and earlier we were also talking about Six Sigma. So I was wondering if you could give us a few examples of this in a law firm, and maybe you can also tell us how this ties in to the whole concept of change management.
Yeah, sure. So at the heart of continuous improvement and Lean Six Sigma is this concept of what we call voice of the customer or voice of the business, which essentially is working out where people want help. Where do people see a problem? Where do they see an opportunity? Or sometimes where we can educate them to find an opportunity and then get their feedback on whether that's something they want us to work on. So we're always sort of thinking about the customer in terms of what does the customer actually want. Now, usually in a law firm, the voice of a customer like ours is focused very much on how do we improve recoveries? How do we actually ensure that we recover most the amount of time that was going on to the file? Or it could be, how do we protect or improve margins or profitability on the work that we are doing? But then sometimes it goes beyond that and we look at how can we improve the client experience as well too. So how can we make sure our clients are having the best experience on the matters that we're engaging with them as well too? So it can be sort of that more sort of harder financial elements, but then also to some of that sort of more that fuzzy stuff, I guess you would describe it, sort of the how did the client feel about how the transaction goes. And so when we start looking for those opportunities, the business will either tell us to say, we're spending too much time on X, our recoveries and such type of work are too low and not where they want to be, or our margins on this are not good enough. And so what we'll do is we'll go away and have a look at that. Now, probably the easiest example to understand in the context of a law firm is when we think about legal review and due diligence. So this is something that, like a lot of the legal teams spend time on, in terms of spending time looking at documents, extracting information, extracting data points from those documents. And this has always been traditionally a challenge to do in an efficient way and bring that sort of work in on budget, because as that process goes through, things often change. You discover things. It always takes longer than it should. And so if we're thinking about a Lean Six Sigma or a continuous improvement approach to that, the way this will work is, firstly, once having identified due diligence is the process, quote unquote, the first thing we'll do is we'll map that process out. So we'll use process mapping tools to sit with the lawyers, sit with the individuals involved, and we'll get them to walk us through that process. There's this great saying in sort of Japanese called walking the gemba, and what it means is actually learning to see, so actually go and actually see the process. And that's quite difficult in a law firm because it's very hard for us to sort of sit over a lawyer's shoulder and watch the process, given most of this sort of work happens on email and phone calls. Essentially, what we sit them down and we run a workshop and we get them to map it out. We use process mapping tools or even post-it notes on a wall, and essentially we get a common understanding of how the process should work. We then asked our lawyers then for, say, well, can you give us some example matters where we've run this process before, where it's gone well, where it's gone badly, where it's somewhere in between. So we try and get a cross section of information. And because lawyers time record, we're then able to get all the time transactions that relate to those particular matters, download them, and then analyze them, looking at who is doing the work, how long the work is taking, and things like that too. And we've actually built some fairly sophisticated AI tools that help us really unpack that work and really be able to allocate who's doing what, when, and how long it's taking.
Yeah, this sounds very scientific.
Well, I'd like to say it is, and we're fortunate enough that we have a data science team here in the firm that allows us to try and do that. We're able to very accurately kind of map out the work that's being done and who's been doing it. And so once we've got that, we can bring that information together, we can analyze that, and what we tend to do is then we replay that back to the team and say, okay, here is what a typical due diligence would look like. This is how many hours the partners will spend, this is how many hours our seniors, juniors, etc. will spend on that, these types of activities. And then through that process of exploration, often answers or ideas will start to surface. So either issues like, for example, our hourly costs for doing due diligence on these types of work seems to be too high. Why is that the case? Why aren't our juniors doing that? Why are our seniors spending more time on this work? And so, and there might be legitimate reasons for that. But then again, typically what we find is like, well, actually, no, there's too much money being spent on that. So we're going to try and move that work to alternative resource, whether that be our delivery centres in Newcastle or India, or it could just be a paralegal resource or more juniors, or can our practice support coordinators help with things in terms of unpacking that stuff and really kind of doing that. And so that's usually done through sort of it's either obvious or through brainstorming sort of ideas. This is also too where we look to bring in technology as well too. So in the legal review context, we'll look to enhance the way that lawyers are working using AI tools to analyse documents and things like that as well too. So where those opportunities sort of show up.
So the lawyers who participate in this process are the same ones that work on these documents and
Correct.
The diligence, right?
Yeah. You have to be talking to the people who actually do the work. There's no point talking to someone who's heard about the work because they won't know. Because the key or the secret sauce or the magic that in terms of finding out where the problems is always getting someone to show, someone who's doing the work to explain to you what they're doing as well too. Because until you see that, you often don't spot those opportunities. And once you've actually had sort of the continuous improvement training, and there's a whole technical explanation here I could go into, which I won't go into now, but there's sort of 8 classifications of what we call waste or non-value add activities. And then once you know about them, and when you talk to lawyers, you start to spot these opportunities, all right, and then you can sort of surface those up, and start exploring how you can solve those things.
And when they're involved in the process, they're more likely to adopt it also, because then they realize they're part of the change that they want to see because they've already highlighted this as a problem.
Exactly. And I think that's an important point. And I'll jump to that, to the sort of the change management piece in terms of once we've actually got a new solution. So what we would do is we'll then work out what we're going to do and then pilot those changes. But the important thing is it's all very well doing that work, but if no one changes the way they work or adopts that new way of working, then essentially we've wasted our time. And so it's very important that those individuals who are going through that and helping us understand the process, they then become very important as change agents going forward, because essentially what we're asking them to do is go and explain to other lawyers why it's better for them, right? Because when we think about change management law firm, and we use the sort of the Rogers adoption curve sort of approach, where we look at those individuals who are bought into the process, the very small numbers of people who are essentially our champions for the solution, and we get them to go and push the solution with their colleagues, because that is a much more effective way of achieving that. Because if I go and tell someone, look, there's a new way of due diligence, this is how you do it, I've been with the firm for a while, so I have some credibility, but I have nowhere near the level of credibility of a senior associate who's doing the work day to day in the trenches, who's actually there. When they talk about the fact that they have saved their time, they talk about their experience in terms of it was much better, it's much easier. I got to go home 2 hours earlier because the machine did most of the work for me and things like that too. So they become our important sort of change agents for us. We very much leverage on that. I often talk about sort of the pebble down the mountain. So the pebble being my change agent, throw the pebble, it's another rock, it's another rock, it's another rock. And the idea is you have this sort of a snowball effect of change. Like that's how I imagine it always works. If I'm honest, does it work as effectively every single time? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But you've got to be persistent as well too. And that, I guess, when it comes to change management, that's the second point. You have to be persistent. You've got to keep reminding and reminding and reminding and reminding and reminding. Lawyers will very much sort of flick back into old ways of working, because that's what they feel comfortable until such time as that new way of working is really embedded in.
Understand. So I want to take a step back and say, what is your advice to a law firm that wants to get its innovation act together and has no clue where to start? So what would you advise the firm to do when it wants to start including the process of innovation and change management into its culture?
Yeah, that's another really good question, and one I really like sort of talking about, because we've been doing this for quite some time. over 10 years the functions existed. But the thing that I think that people need to think about is understand what your why is. So why are you setting up an innovation function or starting on that innovation journey? So, why is it really important? It's really important to have that core understanding of why you're doing something, because if you don't have why and you immediately jump to the what and the how, you just won't achieve the results you're looking for. And I'm a firm believer in that. And I think, if we're honest with ourselves, we've made a couple of missteps along the way in that, in terms of losing track of our why a little bit. And so, coming back to that why, so is it because our competitors are doing it? So is it needed for survival? Is it about retaining staff? Is it about improving or protecting margins? Or potentially, is it about all of the above, or is it about something else as well too? So having that really clear understanding of why we're doing something, and then also being able to communicate that in a really simple, concise way. They talk about sort of having simple why statements. And I always love the one about when Microsoft were developing their Azure platform. Their whole why was simply about speed. That was their entire why. It was whatever they had to do had to be about being quick, right? Because if they weren't quick, they couldn't. People weren't going to adopt. And the why also evolves over a period of time. And inevitably, being a law firm, our why is not quite as simple as that. It's sort of it's a little bit longer. I won't go into what our why is, because that's something that we hold close to what we do. But understanding what your why is really important. Having understood that and agreed what that is, you then need to build a sort of a coalition of people, leaders, senior people, of partners and senior business professionals that buy into that. All right. If they can't buy into it, then don't start, because you will end up having problems down the track. But build that. You have to have that really led from the top vision that everyone is communicatable. Everyone can buy into that. It's really, really important. And then once you've got all that, then the next thing is scale down. Find something small and easy to try and improve, and try and get that done first. We made a bit of a misstep at the beginning of our kind of, we called it a program, we now call it a function, where we try to take on something massive. It was the mergers and acquisition process. We looked at the mergers and acquisition process from end to end, and we had no idea how big and complex that was. And actually, we realized very quickly that we'd taken on something way too big, and we spent a lot of time trying to convince people we should just narrow it down into a very small area. And then hopefully you'll succeed in that improvement and that small win. And then really, really importantly, you have to celebrate success. You have to be making sure that the people that have improved things are recognized. And one of the things that we're very conscious of doing in our function, is that when we do something that improves things and we've demonstrated demonstrated results, we put the lawyers or the partners in front of that, and we give them the credit for achieving that. So it's not us, even though we've done probably most of the work. It's the partners and the lawyers that actually get promoted forward and say, this partner or this lawyer, they're the ones who've driven this. It's their idea, it's their success. Giving them the recognition. And to be fair, it's not unwarranted, because they have done the work, but making sure that we're not taking credit for their work.
That's also added incentive to be a part of the change and invest that time in changing the way you work.
Indeed. And again, it sort of links back to the change management things we were talking before about. The most effective change agents we have are our own lawyers.
And I really liked the example you gave of starting small, because I think a lot of firms unfortunately fail with software, and it's mostly because they have started too big. They've tried to tackle a very big problem, and they've tried to roll it out to the entire firm at one time, maybe sometimes even without a pilot, and it's really gone wrong. And once something goes wrong, then nobody wants to touch anything anymore. That everybody is averse to change, everybody is averse to software, and then that's just a bad experience for the firm altogether.
Very much so. And software in particular. I mean, software, we need to make sure it actually solves a problem. Like, it needs to be very specific, and you need to be able to articulate, this is the problem we're trying to solve in the case of rolling out a software solution. Yeah.
So, we talked about this a little bit earlier. In fact, you brought it out in your answer to the previous question, measuring the benefit of that innovation or that specific tool or software. So my next question was sort of to understand, how do you measure the impact of innovation? Because how do you really say that it's working? We talked about how when something does work, you said we do like to bring the lawyers to the forefront and say, you were the champions of the change, and give them credit for that. But how do we actually measure what metrics or what parameters, because sometimes, like you said, it's time saving, sometimes it's just better security. So for different tools, it's different, but it would be helpful if you could give us a few examples.
Yeah, sure. And I keep saying it's a really good question. It's a great topic to explore. It's probably a better way of describing it. So impact on recoveries and profit, obvious. I think if we can demonstrate that, that's really, really good because it's tangible. We often talk about that in context of estimated hours we've saved, because often it's a little difficult to say that as a result of this solution, recoveries have improved by X or profits improved by Y, because there's so many things that impact those things on matters to matters, So, but generally speaking, if we can roll out a solution that we know that we can prove to ourselves has saved, X hours. So where, for example, we might automate a process or automate a template, and we know that before that process took 2 hours, and now with the automation it takes half an hour. We know that we've saved an hour and a half, and then we can very quickly say how many times does that solution get used times an hour and a half, and we can sort of estimate out to say, well, okay, well, we've saved, X numbers of hours, and where those opportunities exist and where it makes sense, we do try and surface that information, information up. But we're always, it's a little bit false in a law firm's context, because our costs are fairly fixed as a result of some of those solutions. We don't necessarily reduce the number of lawyers that we've got, so it's not really a save.
Cost of those lawyers reduced, right? So
no, exactly.
An opportunity cost, the ability for them to work and do some other work and generate more revenue, but that's harder to quantify.
Indeed. So we talk about that as a sort of we usually talk about it as benefits to the firm, in terms of these are benefits rather than savings. Where the real impact comes, and where we really, in terms of how do we measure what we're doing, the first one is feedback. So feedback from our lawyers, feedback from our clients. So where we actually go and roll out a solution, we'll often constantly seek feedback from our lawyers and go back and check with them. All right, and so we'll do this in a very structured way, where we can actually run surveys and say, well, rate, give us some sort of data that we can look at, but then also to tell us what's going on as well too. And so where we actually get feedback from our lawyers, we'll listen to that, we'll surface that up. Where we've got something good to say, obviously we'll tell everybody about it. Where a client says something good about us, we definitely tell everybody about that as well too. So feedback is very, very important, and we have a very structured way of going and getting that information. The other two ways that we do is we measure what we call involvement and engagement. So involvement is essentially a measurement of the number of lawyers that actually have worked with us or have used a solution that we have available, whether that be a legal tech solution, use of a legal project manager, use of our delivery centres, or it could just be an involvement in a continuous improvement project where we're looking at a process and things like that too. So essentially, it's a hard number. So we've got 100 lawyers. So for example, 50 of them have either worked with us or used a tool. Then our involvement measure is essentially 50%. And then what we do is we look at that 50% and we say, okay, well, of that 50%, how engaged are they? And so we have another set of metrics that say, for example, if you only use one solution in a year, so you only use, for example, our legal project management, if you only use our delivery center once, then that's fine. You're involved, but you're not engaged. Whereas someone who has used our delivery centers and they use them every single week for their entire year, so they're involved, they're also incredibly engaged. Yeah. And so what we're trying to do is push those numbers up. We're trying to push our involvement numbers up, and we try to push our engagement numbers up. And we have a whole formula sitting behind that, which constantly gets tweaked and changed. We try and keep it relatively thing. So and the good thing about that is we've slightly gamified the way that we do that, because we're able to split that down by office, by practice area, by group, and we can say, well, this group is 60% involved. You only have 40% involvement, but whereas this group is 80% involved and 6% engaged, and so you can sort of start try and create some level of competition between some of the partners of the groups and things like that.
That sounds so fun to make it a competitive.
Wow. I'm probably making it sound more fun than it is in reality, because the challenge becomes is that not every solution that we roll out is necessarily relevant for every single group within the firm. Yeah. So our advisory practice is very different from our transactional practice. So, there's always a bit of a tension there. So you're measuring us against solutions that we can't use and things like that too. So it's, as I said, we're trying to find a way of making that fair and a level playing field. is always the challenge. It's by no means perfect, but it's a really good way of trying to see where you're at. And it's great for us internally as well too, inside the function, because we can actually measure ourselves in terms of how effective we are being. But I said feedback, involvement, engagement are the three key measures that we see as being really important.
No, I think those are all important metrics to keep in mind. The last question that I wanted to talk about today is the learning that a law firm gets when it collaborates with the larger legal tech ecosystem, especially legal tech companies. And even Clifford Chance did this with the Create Plus 65 program. So I was wondering if you could tell us how the lawyers benefited from this process. And maybe you can briefly explain a little bit about the Create Plus 65 program.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with that because that's the easy part. So Create 65 or Create Plus 65 is the firm's first innovation lab that we set up, and it's our innovation lab in Asia Pacific. So what its mandate is, it sits alongside our change function, which is what we call best delivery internally. But it's essentially it's there as our sort of our think tank and our vehicle for sort of new ideas that haven't been thought before. Sort of going back to the beginning, it's effectively where we're trying to explore the novelty. So sort of new solutions as opposed to existing solutions, which we're trying to roll out and change based upon how law is doing. It's very much focused on tomorrow, and then sort of also to preparing ourselves for more radical change in the future as well too. So we're somebody who's potentially trying to disrupt the way that law is being done. Our Create 65 innovation team can look at that and assess that and try to work out how's that going to impact us if that then becomes the way of working. So that's kind of what Create 65 is. It sits in as part of our broader R&D function as well too. It's a bit of a special vehicle for that. Thinking more about, well, what do the lawyers get out of that? I guess the first thing I would say is we know that we can't innovate in a bubble. For new ideas and for sort of new thinking to come into the firm, we need to collaborate. And so bringing partners in from outside, whether that be a large legal tech organisation or just even any legal tech organisation, or faculty or education institutions as well too, helps us think differently and also to understand what's going on as well too. Enables us to sort of push our ideas and sort of provide problem statements. So to your question around what lawyers get out of it, I think they get to rant, they get to sort of explain or whinge about what they don't like as well too, or things that could improve. So there's probably a little bit of therapy there as well too.
And the legal tech companies are waiting to hear this, right? They want to know what their customers' problems are. Of course.
Yeah, and then conversely, they also get to test their ideas around how they can solve things with a lawyer who's actually doing the work. And often the thing that I guess both parties get out of that is that the service provider will be like, oh, this is what we wanted to try and do, and it'll be our lawyers or our professional support lawyers, whoever it is who's helping, will go, that's not how we do it. Well, that's not how it's done, or that one will work for these reasons. But if you can do this, this, and this, then that would really, really help us. And so those exchanging of ideas really, really benefits both parties. I think the lawyers also get an opportunity to sort of just break away from day to day as well too. So they get a little bit of a break. And like every organisation, we have lawyers who are super keen to be involved in innovation and try new things and work differently as well too, and they get to flex that muscle, which really helps with retention and sort of giving them sort of a varied experience as well too.
And plus, it's sort of orienting their mind to something that may come in the future, solving a pain point of theirs right now. So
exactly, and I think that's an important point, because often they won't think of things as a problem. They just think of things as the way work is done. So as part of that sort of innovation journey, surfacing up opportunities, surfacing up, again, I keep going about new ideas and new ways of working, gets them to break them out of that sort of their current mode of thinking as well too, which is really, really important, because when they do that, often they will then give them an insight which they'll replay back to us, and something that we've never considered before. And the really tangible example we've had for this, which is one of the things we're most proud of, in the Create 65 Innovation Lab, one of the things they built was the Innovation Academy, which is a training module where we actually teach the lawyers how to think in a different way. So the design thinking, the things they need to think about in terms of how they would approach solving a problem. And then what we do is we expose them to a low-code platform called Brighter, and then we get them to take a problem that they're having day to day, and then go away and build a solution in that platform, or essentially a prototype solution for that platform. They then come back together and they present that back to a panel of partners and other business professionals, and they compete to see which solutions are the best. Now,
this sounds so interesting, like an internal hackathon with low code.
Exactly. Essentially, is essentially a sort of a slow burn hackathon. And the thing that always blows me away is that they come up with things that we would never ever think about. Like particularly the junior lawyers, when they talk about, because often they're doing the sort of the most repetitive, most mind-numbing, boring stuff. So the way that when they can see what can be done with the tool, and then when they sort of expose that way of thinking, they'll come up with a solution and say, "Oh, we should do this," and we think, "Yeah, of course, that makes total sense." And then of course it's over to us to see if we can then make it real, and then we have a whole process that kicks into place. But that Innovation Academy has been one of the most powerful tools for change within the firm, not simply because of the ideas, but then when other partners, other members of the firm come and see what's happening, they go, "Wow, I didn't know we could do this. That's given me some other ideas." And so ideas feed off upon other ideas and things like that too. And so you try and create some momentum of innovation and change that goes on with that. And in terms of bringing, and that wouldn't be possible if you weren't able to bring it in a platform like Brighter to be able to do that. That enables that. And so that's the other thing that the lawyers get out of it, is this sort of enablement to actually go and create something for themselves, as opposed to the traditional way, which we go away, explain something, developers go and develop something, come back and check it with you. Inevitably, it's not quite right, and so that iterative process. But whereas they're building it themselves,
there's more ownership over the process.
Yeah, it shortens that whole thing down, and inevitably the solution becomes much better and much more usable as well too. So we're really proud of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. I think we've learned so much about innovation at a law firm. You talked about a lot of interesting points, and I think the audience is going to find it very, very interesting, especially those that are looking to start building out their innovation teams. That's been very enjoyable. I guess the only thing I would say at the end is, if anybody wants to get in contact and talk about this stuff, then feel free to reach out. I'm always keen to sort of talk to people about these sort of things and hear what they're up to and things like that too, because that again helps me. Again, going back to, we can't innovate in a bubble. Hearing different ideas and things I'm always keen to do that. So please do reach out and say hello. Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.